Hello, awesome humans. I have some big news to share with all of you before we jump into today's conversation with the stunning Mark Groves. I'm super excited to share a brand new Personal Socrates style chapter profiling the world's leading business and life strategist, Tony Robbins. Starting today, May 22nd, 2022, as a member of the Better Questions community, which is free by the way, you can download the chapter for the next 7 days. Head over to behindthehuman.com/newsletter to grab your copy. To give you a little flavor of this chapter, the opening prompt is, what if I decided to live in a beautiful state of mind? The entire flow of the chapter is designed to help us live and experience a thriving mind more days than not. Enjoy it. Tag me on the socials to let me know what lands with you. And again, you can download the chapter for the next 7 days over at behindthehuman.com/newsletter. All right, welcome everyone to another episode of Behind the Human. I'm your host, Mark Champagne, and it's my job to unpack the mental fitness practices and stories of people living at the top of their game, personally and professionally. Today we are jamming with Mark Groves, who is a human connection specialist and founder of Create the Love. In other words, he's a speaker, writer, motivator, creator, and collaborator. And full circle in life, we both started roughly around the same time in the good old pharmaceutical industry and have circled all the way back to doing work that I would say you would probably agree to, that just feels, so aligned and really at the core of our purpose. And it feels nice to reconnect in this space.
Oh yeah, I'd like to go from what we were doing to doing this. Not that there was anything wrong with it. It was the job that I needed at the time to get here, and so excited to be here.
So Mark, job titles and bio definitions and all that aside, who are you? What defines you? Like, who is the Mark in front of this camera right now?
I've always been really very interested as a kid into how people worked, how people thought. My father was probably the main facilitator of that. We'd have great conversations about human behavior and decision making, and made a number of poor decisions growing up, and into adulthood too. And you get really fascinated with, why do we do what we do as humans? That really led to when I used to work at Future Shop, which for people who don't know what that is, it's kind of like a Best Buy, which people might be more familiar with. But it was, you wore suits, you sold extended warranties. It was kind of like the movie The 40-Year-Old Virgin.
That's so true.
It was so much like that. And so I remember at Future Shop, I learned like 9 different ways to close people. And then they went to a more softer selling style. And I worked there while I went to university. And when I got out of university, I worked in pharma. And my sales training at Future Shop was far better than the sales training I got in pharma, which was quite ironic.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I was really at that time reading books like your standard, like How to Win Friends and Influence People, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I had books on how to manipulate human behavior, sales books, but really that's ultimately what you're doing. Yeah. And I had a relationship end in my late 20s. I got engaged, and then that sent me down a deep rabbit hole of, like, why am I so good at talking about all these other things, but not my feelings? Like, that's not a skill set issue. There's something going on here. Why did I get engaged when I didn't actually want to? That was really interesting to me. Why, when I left that engagement and I felt more connected than I had felt in a long time to myself, did I feel like I was being in some ways exiled by people that I loved for my choice? Why was I being judged and shamed? And that really, I think we talked about this when you were on my podcast, just about how, you turn your mess into your message. And that really was it, is I desired so deeply to understand human relating in a romantic level first, because I wanted to solve my own challenges. And as I studied it and went back to school. And I mean, the pharma background was great because I could read all the science on it and understand it well. I really loved looking at the studies on it. And then I went back to school and took positive psychology, and I started to see like everybody isn't taught these things. Like we should all know this. You look at the longest running study on happiness, on well-being, it was called the Harvard Men's Study, now the Harvard Well-Being Study. It shows that at the age of 80, the greatest predictor of your health is not your blood pressure or your cholesterol at age 50. It's actually the quality of your relationships. So I was really struck by how important they are and how little we are taught about how to make really prolific, beautiful, fulfilling relationships. And then to sort of transfer back how imperative that is romantically. But if you really get good at the romantic relationship game and familial, I mean, workplace it's it's nothing. Like it feels like nothing when you can handle conflict with your partner.
Well, it's interesting because I agree. I mean, we're really not taught much, if anything at all, when it comes to relationships. The closest we have is, some dialogue around romantic relationships, but like the relationship with ourselves, I'd say, is the one that's least talked about and probably the most important to start with, right? Because it kind of, from my understanding and in my research and into your work as well, like that stems out to everything else, right? Like you have to love yourself before you can love someone else, and everything in between, whether it's your work or friends and lovers and so forth. Like it all stems from what's happening in your internal empire, right?
Yeah, like your romantic relationships, your frictions at work, they're all informing you where you're limited in your skill set, where you still have unhealed, usually childhood things, where you have underlying beliefs that you haven't navigated or healed, that you don't even realize are running your life and making you reactive or defensive or making you sabotage really good things, not just relationships, but workplace too, allowing yourself to win and succeed, believing you're worthy of those things. I mean, that's why I just feel like romantic relationships seem to be the most frequent place we experience these things. They're usually the most exaggerated there. And so they're a great window into our challenges, or let's say even dysfunctions.
Okay. Now, the question I wanted to ask you, and I don't think I've ever asked you this, but there's one thing, because you were really lighting it up in the sales world, including the Future Shop days, and then back in the pharma world, like things were going well, right, for you professionally.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go through, like you said, this romantic breakup, which it's one thing to ask those questions that you were reflecting on, but it's another thing to go to the next step and like leave behind essentially a whole career to say, hey, I want to go all in this space. Like, where did you get that courage, or who helped guide you through that massive pivot?
Oh man, that was such a big leap, and I think of one of the first questions I asked myself when I got out of my engagement was, how did I get here? How did I get to a
Great
place
question.
where I was so disconnected from myself? Like that was a very important, because I felt like I left myself behind so long. And that segues to the question, which is, I really made a commitment because what I discovered was that I avoided every single hard conversation. I avoided all the conversations that truly mattered. And so I made a rule that I would have every conversation I didn't want to have. And I'd have it
that sounds
pretty
terrifying.
much as soon as I felt it. Yeah, it sucked. It was sucked for
smokes.
someone who avoided them, but you realize that those conversations, which we generally believe are going to end our relationship or cause friction, they're actually the conversations that liberate it and deepen it. Sometimes liberate it in the sense that we don't stay together, but actually oftentimes actually just liberate us and our partners or whoever's in it. It doesn't have to be romantic. And just in that navigation of that commitment, the next one I made, because I realized I was making similar choices over and over again, and this was sort of the preparation of the mindset that I had before the leap, is the next thing I just realized I was making choices that they were hurting me. They were hurting other people. And I remember sitting with myself just thinking, like, you already know this outcome. Every time you do this thing, you wake up feeling not good about yourself. And it was drinking, and I was really avoiding myself through casual relationships. And I remember thinking, like, this isn't new information. So if this isn't new information, why am I not acting upon the information that I'm getting? And so I made a rule that I would always live at my highest level of knowledge, that as soon as I learned something, I would integrate it. And I really saw it as that I would begin to be in integrity with my potential, and just in integrity with who I wanted to be and what my body was telling me about my values and who I was and what I was running from. And so move forward to, because I was 27 when I got out of that engagement, and I left pharma at 34, I think, or 35. So the learning really happened within the business, and I was telling you yesterday when we recorded the podcast with you on mine, that I did this workshop with Lisa Nichols. That was one of the first personal growth workshops I ever did. And I remember her saying, don't quit your job. Like, that's just dumb. She basically said that straight up. Don't quit your job to pursue a dream that hasn't been developed yet. Like, allow the job to be the investor in your dream. And that really changed things for me. Pharma was starting to feel heavy to work at. As I was learning more about relationships and emotion, I was seeing so much that the real, main causes of disease is actually inflammation, and inflammation is correlated to emotional dysregulation and conflict. So I was learning so much that I just had a hard time working in an industry that generally, obviously there's good to it, but generally is about covering up symptoms. And I was like, there's so much more to the core of this. People don't have to live with the suffering and take a pill to treat that suffering, although there are times. We should get to what is really at the basis of it. And so I worked with this coach who said to me, when I said I was afraid to start, he said, how arrogant of you to believe that your gifts are for you. They're not for you. Oh man, that shook me.
Wow.
And he said, they're for the people who need it. And every day you're afraid to start, you don't help them. And that changed the perspective for me deeply. That made it not about me. It made it about service. It made it about honoring the pain I'd been through, the knowledge, this sort of path, much like your path, that I was honoring the gifts I'd been given through the pain I'd been through, and then being able to alchemize or translate into language what at least I knew up until that moment. And I think that's so true of all the teachers we find, is they just tend to be a chapter ahead. And that's true for me. I'm behind zillions of people, and I'm ahead of a few. And I don't mean that hierarchically. I just mean through the path of moving into entrepreneurship, moving through relational understanding. Again, not that I think we often feel there's an inference of hierarchy. It's not that. I've been led by so many incredible people, and I think there's nothing greater than experiencing the courage that someone else has done to get to a new level of themselves. And you and I have talked about this separately, just how there's new levels of us being called upon now. And that will always be true.
Yeah.
That was a long answer to your question.
No, it's great. I mean, it's perfect. Did you ever, I have to just so people have some perspective as well. Like, did you ever imagine that you would be, what are you at? Like, there's like 1 million people or something on Create the Love following you, and you impacting, their thoughts and conversations around relationships. Like, was that ever part of the imagination, of the dream of where you wanted to be going with this? Like, how did it all start, I guess?
No, I felt the calling. I knew that there was something deep in me that wanted to teach and write about relationship, but I had the imposter, you're not a therapist, you're not this, you're not that.
Yeah.
And I remember my sister saying to me, if you look at all the greatest minds in the world, they tend to have not gone to school to develop and share their mind. And I thought that was just
It's
like the
so
exact,
true.
yeah, that was the exact thing I needed to hear. But of course, when you have a belief about something, then you'll start to see the when you start to break through your own upper limits, you'll start to see other people trying to impose theirs upon you. And I had to really be mindful of that other people's limits were not mine. I was really in the ending of the engagement and then the breaking into self-expression and entrepreneurship. I was realizing how much my life had been lived through a story I was taught, that it was not the story it all served a purpose. But if, my favorite class in college was psych of child development. It wasn't finance. And that's what I did my undergrad in, and that tells you something, that I chose to become a higher status provider because the perception was if I went after something like psychology or like art or like creativity, that it's not monetizable. And I had to break and shatter all those beliefs as I stepped into this work because, I remember my coach saying to me, like, just leap. Like, the universe will catch you when you are in your passions. And I'm like, dude, smoke more weed. Like, no way, So no, I mean, there was a deep feeling in my soul that this was what I had to do, whatever soul even means. I just remember this, like, I got to do this. It just lit me up, and it wasn't work. And I remember I went through a breakup, and she was a social media manager for companies. And she said, you should start an Instagram account. So I didn't know what Instagram was. I just saw that she used it for companies. And we broke up, and then I started an Instagram account, and I posted a quote, and then I wrote about the quote. And gosh, I'm sure my first post is still there, but then you couldn't edit. So if you had like a spelling error, you couldn't change it. It was like just your poor English was saved forever. But I just did it every day. I did it every day. And I never missed a day until October, just in 2021. I, for the first time, took 2 weeks off from it. And at some point, I was even doing 2 a day. So, I was going from, like, a lot of people don't see that. That was 8 years of, because a lot of people would ask me, how do you do that? How do you get to that place? How do you create that type of following? And I'm like, here's the formula. It's not that complex. You got to be self-expressed, but you got to be committed. And that's really it. You got to learn. And I mean, almost everyone drops off as soon as they realize they have to do it every day. And then you realize
that's the thing, right? It's the commitment and the consistency. It's the same thing with mental fitness. I mean, there's nothing earth shattering about the practices. They've been around since the beginning of time, but it's just the people that are thinking at a whole other level and that are prioritizing the health of their mind. They're doing these small things every single day. And over time that stacks up. Right. And like, it's just, and that's why I'm so lit up about the work, because if I can at least provide the daily reminders through my work, this show, and having great conversations with people like yourself, then hopefully it just keeps giving the reminders for people like, oh yeah, I could do that, or that's a good question, I can try this, and then eventually get people to the flow that works for them so they stay consistent, right?
Yeah, that managing where your attention goes is so important, especially in a world that really is monetizing your attention. So, we really, unless we're sitting in really deep discernment and awareness of where we are putting our awareness, which we don't tend to do. The unconscious mind gets pulled to fancy things. It gets pulled to, I mean, Instagram and Facebook and all these things are psychologically designed to keep us hooked. That's literally what they are meant to do. So when they say that your mental health is their number one priority, it is not their number one priority. It might be their number 5 or 6, basically to check boxes. I see it as obviously a very beautiful tool because it's facilitated the work that I do. And like anything, I have to be really mindful of what I'm doing. Like your habits, how much time. You ever get that screen report after you've had a screen heavy week, and then you're like, that's a whole job. Like that's a job. And when we say we don't have time, you realize, obviously that's true sometimes.
Yeah.
But we realize that we're not making it. It's going to things like Netflix. It's going to things like social media. And if it could just go to something productive and self-expressed and moving you towards your dreams that you have, it would completely change your life. You have no idea what just beginning those practices of meditation or journaling or breath work, all of them, will completely do to your life, because all of a sudden you become aware of your awareness. And when you're aware of your awareness, then you're now responsible for your awareness, and then you're responsible for your choices, and then, you're free.
Hello, everyone. I first wanted to say thanks for being here, and I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to let you know, if you're interested, I just launched the Better Questions newsletter, designed to provide you with a consistent 15-minute opportunity to pause and think, because a pause leads to clarity and operating with intention, where we all win and thrive. The newsletter is short, simple, and practical, providing you with 3 quality reflective prompts and mental fitness twice a month. But as always, I'll adjust the frequency based on your feedback. Never forget, at any point, you are always one question away from a completely different life or outcome. You can sign up over at BehindTheHuman.com, which will also give you a free preview of my debut book, Personal Socrates. BehindTheHuman.com. Now back to the show. So on the social front, the one that always gets me, and it's just, it like rattles my core, because I'm like, holy shit, there's so much power over me from this platform, is when you catch yourself and you didn't even realize you picked up your phone and somehow you're scrolling in one of the apps. Like, how did I even get here? Like, what is happening?
Nuts? Right? Isn't that nuts?
So, it makes me think of, this is one of the questions I did want to ask you, and I'd love to see how that 2-week social media or Instagram vacation went, or how that felt for you. But the other, I guess the higher question is, when we think of our relationship with this technology and these what can be, great tools, and obviously you've experienced that in your own work and your business, like, how do you view healthy relationships with these tools and these devices and technology?
I really feel like, for me, it's a work in progress. Like, I don't know yet, because for us, just as humans, we have not evolved to have these. It's been such a short period of time. And you look at the rise, especially in teenage girls' anxiety and depression. You think about it, a social media platform is exactly designed, unfortunately, to really impact young girls mostly. And that's because starting from the age of 10, girls are being judged for how their body looks, and boys are being judged mainly for how it performs. And, I remember interviewing this psychologist named Laura McNally, and she was talking about how before, people used to go into their psychologist with pictures of like Tom Cruise and being like, hey, I'd like this nose, or, they'd pick someone, I want this chin. But now they actually go in with Facetune apps. So, the reason I took that break in October is because I felt psychologically and mentally overwhelmed. I had not felt that level of anxiety. It was in September that I experienced it. I just couldn't hold anymore. And I remember thinking to myself, as I was sitting in a work brainstorming strategic meeting, and I was thinking, I couldn't keep going in the same direction I was going. And, I think what I learned a lot from that, because that was
How did you get to that, Mark? How did you get to that realization and not continue on autopilot?
Well, I couldn't not listen. I sat with my head in my hands, and I just started to cry. And I just realized I was at this moment where I was afraid of what would happen to my mind if I kept going. And I'm grateful to have that level of awareness, but really that level of awareness was more like the red flags, not the orange flags, not the subtle nudges. And I realized that you can begin or continue to live a life that feels very normal, and you don't realize how much you're carrying until you can't carry anymore. And then you realize how heavy a lot of it has been. And so I realized I remember that night Googling psychotic break versus nervous breakdown. And I was grateful that I had neither in the definition. But I also realized that I couldn't keep doing things the way I was. And that was largely social media. That was largely self-expression. And, social media in the last couple of years, especially, has become just a very stressful place, not just news and misinformation on many directions, not just one side, and cancel culture. And, all of it is psychologically, it's actually, like all humans need. And when you look at even the data on culture, corporate culture, the greatest determinant of a successful corporate culture is having psychological safety to be yourself. And I would say that social media does not exemplify a place that has psychological safety. Of course, you can design your experience of it to create that. And I realized, when you're a public figure and it's just, I started to think, like, what level of anonymity do I want? What level of self-expression do I want? What level of transparency do I want? A lot of my work has been built upon me just telling the truth of my own experience. And I realized that was really part of what I had to start talking more about is being able to manage your relationship with things like devices and how easy it is to fall prey to whatever reward systems can come. Also, from a business strategic perspective, if I was to do it all over again, I would, the one thing I would do differently is I would diversify more readily where my customers were coming from. Because, one of the jokes, although it's not really a joke, about social media is that you're building a mansion in someone else's backyard. Like, you're building a business, and the warning signs of that came when people had Facebook pages that they invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in, and then all of a sudden Facebook just changed the algorithm and people's businesses were gone overnight. And that is a dangerous game. That's, when you look at building your business, use Instagram as a vehicle for your business, but do not build your business on Instagram. Do not build it on TikTok. Funnel people to a place where you own the customers. You have their data. Not their data. That sounds just like them. Their email address. Yeah. Because now I have
email lists are still.
That's the way.
It's the way, and it's so funny because it's like the original form of, I guess, digital communication. That how many different companies and different people have tried to, just completely do away with email. But at the same time, I saw it with my book. It still that was the highest conversion in across all channels, including podcasts, was email lists. So it's still there, and I think you can still have, like, as long as you don't abuse it. It all comes back to, like, let's not abuse these privileges. Somebody gives you your email and you're spamming them every week, then that's a different story. But if you're really showing up with true value and respecting the other human on the other side, there's just a beautiful opportunity to dialogue, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that, like, being able to, because right now, I have over 1 million people on Instagram that if Instagram deleted my profile, I would not have, like, it would just be gone. So that shows you, like, what a horrible business strategy, like, when you look at it in hindsight. So
come on, Mark, pull it together.
No, right. But that's the thing, is you start to realize you don't recognize generally how much that weighs, in relationship. Harriet Lerner, who's a psychologist, has this line where she says that if you don't feel free to leave a relationship, you won't feel free to be yourself in it. And what she means by that is, if your partner pays for everything and supports everyone, if you can't survive without your partner paying for everything, then you won't feel free to be yourself in the relationship. Because if you being yourself in the relationship costs you the relationship, you don't have survival outside the relationship. And the same thing is true within business relationships, if it in itself is not a liberating experience, then you're operating in a dependency, and then you won't feel free to self-express. Gabor Mate talks about how every human has two needs. We have the need for self-expression and authenticity, and we have the need for belonging. But when self-expression threatens belonging, belonging wins. And that is very much what I've felt on social media, is that it is not a place that's free to self-express. I'm Canadian. It's not even free to fully self-express in Canada anymore on a very deep subconscious level. No matter your perspective, just the way that the government has oriented has proven this to be true. And so we think often our belief makes us safe, but one day they might not agree with the belief you have, and that changes everything. And I think all of that takes a large psychological toll that we don't really recognize is there.
Yeah, I think you and I talked about it yesterday. It comes back to that language of psychic toll, right? Like it just keeps stacking in your mind. But I feel like the through line of the conversation so far, and even coming back to what you shared around Instagram and whatnot, because I know you're thinking about this from a business perspective, comes back to, again, like having those conversations you don't want to have. It's like that's been there in the back of your mind, and you're having those conversations now, right? So for everyone listening, because we all have different things going in our lives. Like what has helped you, Mark, to have those difficult conversations, whether that's with other people or yourself? Like what really helps you to, I guess, be vulnerable enough, pause long enough to unpack these things so that they don't turn into these situations where you're like, oh shit, I missed all the warning signs.
Right. Well, the first thing I asked myself after this previous experience was, again, how did I get here? Like, when did I forget about the brilliance of my own intuition? When did I forget to trust myself? When did I forget to listen? Why did I forget? What was the benefit of forgetting? What was the reward I was getting? And the reward was that I was having a successful business. So why shift that? Which goes against my whole ethos, because that right away called me into my integrity, which was truth over everything. Like if truth burns anything down, it's being held up by something else, by dishonesty, by avoidance. And, when my partner and I, our previous iteration of our relationship ended, and then when we got back together, one of the core tenets of our new relationship, we call relationship 2.0, is that we said truth over everything, always. Like our relationship to one another is to honor the truth that exists for each of us individually, and then the collective truth that the relationship shares. And so that's really the through line of my whole experience is, am I willing to turn towards the things that are real in my life and my feelings? Because, we deny it often. We deny the truth. We deny reality because maybe it's psychologically scary, right? And that's true all the time. We don't want to accept truths that destabilize our identities, our beliefs. And when we do that, what we begin to do is numb ourselves. We begin to make it so we actually have to turn down our awareness because we have to accommodate that we're accommodating this sense of, in some way, dishonesty because we don't like an uncomfortable truth. But that's always where the path is. Truths don't go anywhere when you deny them. In work on human systems and family systems and inherited trauma, anything that gets denied just gets buried and reroutes and becomes stronger. Yeah. And that's true of human systems. So that, for anyone listening, my invitation is always, what truths are you not listening to? What truths are you denying? And what would happen if you accepted it? You had that great point of inquiry of, like, imagine if it all worked out. Leaving pharma, I never thought it would come here. I did hope that it would just lead to not having to go back to pharma, and being able to monetize living in a passion, which I recognize not everyone gets to do, which is a real honor. And the other question of, like, imagine if, just that point of inquiry. And I wasn't living, when I get to those places, I'm not living in imagine if. I'm living in hopefully not. I'm living in scarcity. I'm living in not trusting. I'm really diving back into joining the main narrative of how people are supposed to live. And I've realized that although there is some joy found in normality, sure, it's not the life I want. I don't want a normal relationship. I don't want a normal life. I don't want normal self-expression. I don't want a normal business. A friend of mine said to me the other day, she was just inquiring, and she said, like, who came up with 9 to 5? Like, why 9 to 5? Why not like 10 to 2 or, and like, who said 5 days a week? Why not 3? Why do we not ask these questions now? And I live in a world where I have to be reminded to get back to the place. And that's what the practices of mental fitness do, is remind you to get back to the place. But, I think it shows you, like, I have practices of meditation, breath work, now journaling, thanks to you.
Awesome.
Yeah. And even with that, I sort of lost myself or forgot about myself. And there's such service in that, because then I get to remember myself again. Exactly. I get, and then I get to see my blind spots, and I get to see where I still am not aware of my fears and how I let scarcity drive the car. And then you end up in a different life. And thankfully I listened to the very alarming mental warning that was like, on the other side of this is not good. And it just reminds me so much of when we get to states of illness or unwellness in general, it's because we're not listening, and if that's the thing that reminds us to get still, to reclaim ourselves, to heal ourselves, to stop doing things that are taking this giant psychic toll, because no choice that's out of integrity is free, ever. But choices that are in integrity are liberating. I mean, the feeling of being in alignment with what is true for you is so freeing. I mean, I don't think there's a better feeling in the world than knowing you can sleep at night loving who you are.
Yeah. But the thing, like, I was just listening to you respond to that one. There's so many things that were popping, that, like, one of them being, I feel like there's this illusion that, you're the connection specialist, the expert in the space. You spend a lot of time, obviously, doing everything possible to educate yourself in this field. And I do the same thing with questions and mental fitness. But I left you that question yesterday on your show. I journaled on that last night. Like, I was going into a mentality before going to bed of scarcity and financials. And I'm like, whoa, there it is. Like, wait a second, use the prompt, go into what if everything went right, and just knowing that that'll shift the mind. Like, but there's this illusion, I think, that if we're in it like this, it's like we've got to dial, like, all figure it out. They're practices called practices for a reason. You're practicing. We're all a human. We're evolving. But I think where the big unlock is, and it's a good example you brought up with the 9 to 5, is like, we've got to stay curious. I mean, at one point, the 9 to 5 thing probably made a lot of sense, and it was probably something related to the Industrial Revolution. But fuck, man, like, shit changes. Like, ask some questions. Like, let's just come off
daylight
autopilot.
Savings time. Like, get rid of that shit.
Every year we talk about this. More people are dying in heart attacks, but yet here we're gonna just pop the clocks back an hour. Like, I don't get, just.
That stuff is, but that shows you how systems support things that, like, no one wants daylight savings times, and yet we still have it. What the F, I mean, I've always thought, like, the person who tells you they have it figured out, run from them, because, the thing that I think has been part of the reason I've found some level of success or people wanting or desiring to listen to me, and some level, which my teachers in junior high and elementary would be appalled by, because I used to talk so much in class. So to get paid to talk now is a totally different. They're like, fuck that, man.
See, full alignment.
He wouldn't shut up, but that's the thing, is the thing that might be what exiled you or got you in trouble might actually be your superpower. And you don't realize that because society said you don't fit in, or you're not sitting in your desk from fucking 8 to 3. What kid wants to sit in a desk? Like, anyways, that's a whole other conversation. But that what you mentioned, what you invited, to stay in curiosity, to be willing to be wrong, because if you've lived the life you were taught to live, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you wake up to the awareness that you're choosing something that maybe is not in alignment, you have to sit with the reality of feeling the pain of the responsibility of choice. Because if you wake up and realize that you choose everything, then you look back upon your life and you go, well, why did I choose that? And so you have to increase your capacity for the shame that's going to come with that. But normally what we do is go back to the old thing or pick up addictions. We don't sit with that. And, in the words of Francis Weller, he would say, let it cook you. Like, let it cook you. That is when you enter the nigredo, enter the space of transformation. It's the cocoon. It's the space that allows you to change. And I didn't finish my last thought, which was, I think what has allowed me that success in some way is because I just keep sharing what I don't really understand yet, or what I've just learned. And I share it through my own experience. And that's because I'm in the trenches with everybody. I'm not any different. When my relationship ended, I have a platform built on speaking about relationships. I just lived that breakup pretty out loud. I shared my process with the permission of my partner. And it was some of the hardest shit I've ever had to share, and some of the most vulnerable, most painful things. But I just thought, if someone else can be witnessed in this, like, can feel validated for their suffering as I share my own, that made it worth it. And, I remember Lisa Nichols said at that workshop, I had quite a few little gems that hit me right in the soul. It was, no one gives a shit about perfection. Like, no one identifies with perfection. Everybody identifies with imperfection. And so when we share that part of ourselves, and it's not contrived, that's what people actually connect over. That's what people are inspired by. And so, like, as so many of us try to chase ultimate achievement or the perfect abs or whatever it is, realizing that that's really not the substance that humans really crave, which is connection and being seen and being humanized, Yeah.
Lisa Nichols. She shout out if you're listening. She even for me, this would have been back when I was hired in the pharma world. It was around the same time The Secret came out, and
that's right, because she was in there.
Yeah, she was in there, and I remember there were so many things in that movie that it's so funny now. Like, you look at people like Joe Dispenza and so forth. Like, the
Bruce
science
Lipton,
right. That the science is actually catching up to what at that time was just seen like such out there kind of philosophy and all this stuff. But like, if you were just open to, again, being like learning and being curious to, well, wait a second, like, what's being said here, then you can, at least you have the opportunity to try some stuff out.
So true. I remember my brother, when The Secret came out, he's not into that kind of stuff, but I remember, I think I watched it with him. I just remember him watching it and him saying to me, "That's so dumb. Like, you don't think of a red bike and get a red bike. Would you steal the bike?" Like, I remember he's always like my cynical tests group. But I remember when I studied positive psychology, one of the sections was on the science of optimism. And the science of optimism is basically The Secret. They took, there's a great book. There's also an article based on the book called The Luck Factor. And the guy studied all unlucky people love to be studied, of course, right? To prove how unlucky they are. So they volunteered right away. And then they studied what lucky people did. And then they taught unlucky people what lucky people did. And it changed their lives. And so it shows you, like, the science of optimism is essentially the same with Barbara Fredrickson work on positive emotion, broaden and build theory, which is that when you're in positive emotion, You are looking for social connections. You're looking for opportunities. And the science of optimism, the people who were lucky, I mean, these people took different places to work. One guy, where he found most of the time at a party, I believe it was that he said he'd end up finding himself drawn to wanting to talk to the most attractive woman in the room. He started to actually make a rule that he would talk to people in a certain colored shirt. And so that completely changed his life. And so I think when we start to take responsibility again, where our attention goes, you start to see that the science that has caught up, and again, it's so funny how humans, we just need it to be validated by this measurement, as where really the mystical has always lived in the human experience. Ram Dass has a quote where he says that miracles remind us that we don't know how it works. And I think that's so true.
Yeah. Well, I think you just have to avoid, like, if you can avoid the extremes in situations and not get too attached to the entertainment. Like if I see manifest the red bike or the parking spot and stuff like that. And there's some truth to certain aspects of that. But people, you get caught up on, oh, well, I want $1 million. Like, I just need to do this. Well, it's not really that simple. I mean, it like, if you really then get into it, because I've had John Azarath on the show twice. And I mean, he literally reversed, his colitis and Crohn's, not just with thought. I mean, that was part of it, but it was putting his mind into a state of, I can heal. And then I made the changes from a diet perspective, started exercising, but I believed that I can heal from the inside out. And next thing you know, like, he's gone from, he was about to have this crazy amount of surgery. I think he was on like 25 meds, and he's off all of it. Off all of it. Right.
That's incredible.
Like, I mean, it's not just one thing, but it does start, to your point, with the mind. Like, if you're going down a negative track, I mean, you can just anticipate or expect to have more negativity flowing through your life. So, why not try to do everything possible to flip into the positive state? And we've all experienced this. The next thing you feel like, oh, I'm flowing. Someone just called. Like, that felt right. All of a sudden you see these other opportunities. I mean, that's not luck.
No, it's like so amazing.
You're bringing that. So
to give yourself that credit is just, I think, important, that we create it, that we can do it, that we change it, that we're responsible for it. Oh man, it's the power of the mind. It is incredible, the power of the mind. And then
really
you get, like, you just think of, if I was testing, I have a Whoop, and it tells you your HRV, your heart rate variability, and the higher your heart rate variability, the better. And mine oscillates at like mediocre to better than mediocre. And I tested out, okay, well, what happens if I am not consuming any news at all, and I don't go on social media for 3 days? And my HRV touched the sky, so it was really interesting to see how these little subtle interactions that we don't think have a psychic toll, the keeping the toxic person in your life, being toxic in the way that we operate in our behaviors in relationship, they all have a toll. And it's like, are we willing to take responsibility for the choices we're making that have a toll upon us? Because what can replace that choice is a liberating choice, something that frees us, something that, you used that term yesterday, are we climbing the wrong mountain? Something that allows us to move to the right mountain. I think that's so important.
Yeah. Powerful stuff. I want to respect your time, sir. So I'm going to wrap up. I'll ask you one final question, and that's just around, maybe two, if we can sneak it in. One, just like, what are some of your non-negotiables when it comes to the health of your mind? Like, if you are traveling, the schedule's busy, what doesn't get dropped in the hotel or wherever you're at?
Yeah, workouts have to be included. That's my number one go-to, especially traveling. And I learned that pretty early on, that with time changes and all that kind of stuff, I'll work out before I'd meditate any day. That's because in it, you can move it into a moving meditation. And I just feel so alive. It does so many things for my body. I'll do intervals on a treadmill. I'll do kettlebell workouts, dumbbell, kettlebell styles. So yeah, that's the thing that doesn't get dropped for me. And breath work actually is
I wanted to ask you
If
about
there's,
that actually. What?
yeah, I was going to
what
say,
are you
if there's
trying?
something that I would, if I have more time, I would do breath work over meditation too, because in a way it is integrating meditation. So I do 3 rounds of Wim Hof with breath holds. And if I'm like in my normal routine, it would be meditation, breath work, cold plunge. That would be my standard if I've got it and it's available. But I will cold shower too, pretty much, especially if I'm traveling.
Yeah.
That revitalizes the body.
That
and
gets
the
you
mind.
going.
Yeah.
That's what I like about breath work as well. I'm the same as you. I mean, I do meditate, and I know the science behind it. I know the benefits, they're there. But what I like about breath work is that there is really good science there as well, but you feel it immediately, right? Like
It's so
it's there.
good.
We've got to get you hooked up with Othership. Robbie Bent from Othership was on the show, and they also have some physical locations in Toronto right now, and they're expanding. But hot cold therapy, breath work, and their app, their dailies are typically 5-6 minute long, either uppers or downers to just slow things down and calm things down with your breath.
Cool. Yeah, I have to
feel
check
like
them
you'd
out.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, brother. Last question for you. What makes you smile these days?
A couple things. Food. I love food. Adventure for me is I really prioritize getting out for hikes and mountain biking and adventure. Like I love going on trips with my partner and our dog and just like seeing the world, seeing the road, trying new things. I'd say that's it. That's for sure the thing that lights me up the most. I think when I'm doing that, I'm reminding myself that life is always most delicious in the spaces that are unknown. And so adventure is a good way it's subtle, but it reminds you that the business things you're doing or the relational things you're doing, we need to always go to that edge, to that space of conversations we've never had, lives we've never lived, things we've never done. That's where to be.
Well said. Well said. Well, Mark, thank you from me for making some time to come jam on the show, but a higher thank you for you following your heart and grabbing onto some courage to leave, a pretty stable and lucrative career to really jump in and do the work that matters most to you. And because of that, over all those years, you just continue to help so many people out there. And that's a really noble thing to be doing, and just showing up as the real you all the time. I know I appreciate that. And I'm sure many do as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. And I love that our pharma careers brought us full circle to 2 leaps. And I think people don't recognize what it can become, and it can become everything, and it will continue to evolve when you live from that space. So thanks for the reminder for me to live from that space too, and appreciate you and your work and trusting me with your audience.
Beautiful.